India, a beacon of democracy in the developing world, experienced a dark chapter in its history on June 25, 1975. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency, suspending civil liberties and plunging the nation into an abyss of authoritarian rule. The emergency, as it came to be known, lasted for 21 long months, leaving an enduring scar on India's democratic fabric. This period witnessed unprecedented censorship, the detention of political opponents, and a brutal crackdown on dissent. The emergency was a watershed moment in India's post-independence journey, raising fundamental questions about the balance between individual freedoms and national security. It also highlighted the fragility of democratic institutions in the face of executive overreach. The events of 1975 serve as a stark reminder of the constant need to safeguard democratic values and the importance of an informed and vigilant citizenry. The emergency was a complex event with far-reaching consequences. It was a culmination of political, economic and social factors that had been brewing for some time. Understanding the context leading up to the emergency is crucial for comprehending its profound impact on India's political landscape. By the early 1970s, India found itself grappling with a multitude of challenges. The optimism of the post-independence era had faded, replaced by a sense of disillusionment and unrest. Economic growth had stagnated, leading to widespread poverty, unemployment and inflation. The gap between the rich and the poor widened, fueling social tensions. The political landscape was equally turbulent. Indira Gandhi, who had come to power in 1966, faced growing opposition from within her own party and from the opposition ranks. Her socialist policies, while well-intentioned, had alienated many, particularly the urban middle class and the business community. The opposition, sensing her vulnerability, stepped up its attacks, accusing her government of corruption and authoritarianism. Adding fuel to the fire was a series of agitations and protests that erupted across the country. Students, farmers and trade unions took to the streets demanding economic relief and political reforms. The government's response was often heavy-handed, further alienating large sections of the population. The situation was ripe for a major upheaval, and it came in the form of a court verdict that shook the very foundations of Indian democracy. On June 12, 1975, the Allahabad High Court delivered a judgment that sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. The court found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractices during the 1971 Lok Sabha elections and declared her election void. The verdict was a major embarrassment for the Prime Minister and emboldened the opposition, which demanded her immediate resignation. Gandhi, however, refused to step down, claiming that the court's decision was politically motivated. She appealed to the Supreme Court, but the damage had been done. The opposition, led by veteran socialist leader Jayaprakash Narayan, launched a nationwide movement calling for her ouster. Narayan, popularly known as JP, galvanized the masses, urging them to rise up against what he called Indira's dictatorship. The country was on the brink. The government, fearing a loss of control, decided to take drastic measures. On the fateful night of June 25, 1975, Indira Gandhi, with the President's approval, declared a state of emergency, suspending fundamental rights and unleashing a reign of terror that would forever alter the course of Indian history. The declaration of emergency was a turning point in India's democratic journey. Under the pretext of maintaining law and order and thwarting a perceived threat to national security, the government assumed sweeping powers, effectively suspending the constitution and transforming India into a police state. The emergency was proclaimed under Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, which allowed the government to declare a state of emergency on grounds of internal disturbance. However, the circumstances surrounding the declaration were widely seen as a blatant misuse of this provision for political expediency. The opposition argued that the real internal disturbance was the government's own making, a result of its misgovernance and corruption. With the stroke of a pen, fundamental rights guaranteed under the Constitution were suspended. Freedom of speech and expression, assembly and the press were effectively muzzled. The media was subjected to strict censorship, with newspapers forced to toe the government line or face closure. Political opponents, activists, journalists and anyone deemed critical of the government were arrested and detained without trial under the Draconian Maintenance of Internal Security Act, or MISA. Section 5. The Iron Fist of Emergency. The emergency witnessed a systematic dismantling of democratic institutions and a brutal crackdown on dissent. The government, led by Indira Gandhi and her younger son Sanjay Gandhi, who wielded enormous extra-constitutional power, brook no opposition. Parliament was reduced to a rubber stamp, with dissenters silenced or sidelined. The judiciary, too, was brought under pressure, with judges seen as sympathetic to the government being elevated to higher positions. One of the most controversial aspects of the emergency was the forced sterilization program, spearheaded by Sanjay Gandhi. In a bid to control the burgeoning population, the government resorted to coercive methods targeting mostly poor and marginalized communities. Millions of men and women were subjected to forced sterilization, often in unsanitary conditions, leading to widespread resentment and anger. The government also used the emergency to push through a series of constitutional amendments aimed at consolidating its power. The 42nd Amendment, passed in 1976, was particularly notorious for curtailing judicial review, limiting the powers of the judiciary and giving the government sweeping powers to amend the Constitution. Section 6. Public Response and Resistance. The emergency evoked a mixed response from the Indian public. While a section of the population, particularly those who had benefited from Indira Gandhi's populist policies, supported the emergency, a vast majority watched in stunned silence as their freedoms were snatched away. Fear and uncertainty gripped the nation. However, beneath the surface of apparent calm, a spirit of resistance was brewing. Underground movements emerged, challenging the government's narrative and disseminating information through clandestine publications. Individuals from different walks of life, risking their freedom and safety, raised their voices against the emergency. The judiciary, despite facing immense pressure, showed remarkable courage in resisting some of the government's excesses. Several high courts delivered judgments that upheld the rule of law, even if it meant going against the government's wishes. The press, though heavily censored, found subtle ways to express dissent, often through cartoons and satire. Section 7. The Emergency Unravels. By 1977, the emergency had begun to unravel. The government's initial claims of restoring order and stability rang hollow in the face of widespread repression and economic mismanagement. The forced sterilization program had backfired, alienating even those who had once supported Indira Gandhi. Realizing that the mood of the nation had turned against her, Indira Gandhi made a surprise announcement in January 1977. She would hold fresh elections and lift the emergency. The opposition, which had been in disarray, united under the banner of the Janata Party, a coalition of diverse political forces opposed to the emergency. The 1977 general elections were a watershed moment in Indian history. For the first time since independence, the Congress Party was defeated at the national level. The Janata Party, riding on a wave of anti-emergency sentiment, swept to power, marking a resounding victory for Indian democracy. Section 8. A Tarnished Legacy. The emergency remains a dark chapter in India's post-independence history. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of democratic institutions and the ever-present danger of authoritarianism. The emergency tarnished India's image as a model democracy and raised serious questions about the balance between individual freedoms and national security. The excesses committed during the emergency, including the suspension of fundamental rights, the muzzling of the press, the detention of political opponents without trial, and the forced sterilization program, left an enduring scar on the nation's psyche. The emergency also highlighted the dangers of a single party holding unchecked power and the importance of a strong and independent judiciary. The legacy of the emergency continues to be debated even today. Some argue that it was a necessary evil, a bitter pill that India had to swallow to save itself from anarchy. Others, however, believe that it was a blatant power grab by Indira Gandhi and her coterie, a deliberate attempt to dismantle democracy and establish a dynastic rule. Section 9. Safeguarding Democracy. Lessons from the Emergency. The emergency holds many important lessons for India. It is a stark reminder of the importance of safeguarding democratic values, upholding the rule of law and protecting individual liberties. It also underscores the need for a vigilant citizenry, a free and independent media, and strong institutions that can act as checks and balances on executive power. In the aftermath of the emergency, India took several steps to ensure that such an event never occurred again. The 44th Amendment to the Constitution, passed in 1978, restored judicial review, made it more difficult for the government to declare a state of emergency, and strengthened fundamental rights. The emergency serves as a constant reminder that democracy is a precious and fragile thing that needs to be nurtured and protected. It is a collective responsibility of every citizen to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. The emergency remains a dark chapter in India's history, but it is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of democracy.